We continue our Easter-tide sermon series, Who Was Jesus Christ?, by continuing to dive deep into some challenging theological ideas found in what is often called Jesus' farewell discourse in the Gospel of John. We remember that in this part of the story, the disciples are gathered together in the upper room. They have just finished sharing the first Last Supper. Jesus is preparing his followers for his imminent death. The air is likely thick with grief, anxiety, confusion, and fear. We also remember that the Gospel of John was written during a time of deep intra-Jewish conflict, somewhere around 75 to 80 CE, about 45 years after Jesus' death. 5 or 10 years prior to its writing, in the year 70, the Jewish temple was destroyed by the Roman Empire. The world, as people knew it, had fallen apart. Communities were fractured. People were grieving. And followers of Jesus in the Jewish community were increasingly being pushed to the margins of religious life. As the Interpreter's Bible puts it, the fourth evangelist and those for whom he wrote understood themselves to be a persecuted religious minority, expelled from the synagogue, their religious home, because of their faith in Jesus. The pain of this intra-Jewish struggle is fresh and real for the fourth evangelist. Many of Jesus' words in the farewell discourse can be read as intended to uphold this community in its struggles. So when we hear this part of John's gospel, we hold two groups of people in our imagination at once. The disciples within the story itself, gathered around Jesus in fear and uncertainty, and the later Christian communities hearing this gospel decades later while trying to survive a world unraveling around them. And in both cases, these are communities asking the same question. How do we live faithfully when the world feels like it's falling apart? That question is not so different from our own most days, these days. Now, in this section of the farewell discourse, Jesus says something that I honestly don't think that we repeat or emphasize nearly as often as some of the other verses in this farewell discourse, verses like, "No one comes to the Father except me, and I am in the Father, and the Father is in me," both of which I've preached on. But this line often gets overlooked. Jesus says, "The one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these." Have you heard that line preached on before? Is that a familiar tale as followers of the way? It's interesting, isn't it? The verses that the church chooses to emphasize and which ones sort of quietly fade into the background. Because this verse I find astonishing. "The one who believes in me will also do the works that I do and will do even greater works than the ones that I have done." Not only, it seems, are disciples expected to continue Jesus' work, Jesus imagines that his ministry of love and healing, of liberation and mercy will expand beyond his earthly life. Gail O'Day, writing in the Interpreter's Bible, explains it this way: "The disciples' works are greater because they will reveal the completed story of the Word made flesh, and hence the fullness of God's love." In other words, Jesus' ministry does not end with Jesus' death. It continues, it grows bigger through us. We are not merely passive admirers of Jesus' work from the past. We, the invitation goes, are current participants in his ongoing work. Everything that Jesus did while walking the earth, feeding the hungry and welcoming the outcast and healing the sick, challenging systems of oppression, offering forgiveness, proclaiming dignity to those that the world discarded. It's not simply meant to be remembered. It's meant to be continued. The story is not over. That's why we say in the UCC that God is still speaking. Jesus is still speaking, still loving, still liberating, still healing through us, through our choices, through our courage, through the ways that we move in the world, for the ways that we stand up for those marginalized ones. And Jesus tells us how this is going to happen. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. You know the ones that he gave us earlier in his ministry? We know what they are. What are they? Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the commandments. That's how we grow Jesus' work and do more than he was able to do. And he adds another one in the Gospel of John just a little bit before this discourse, while still at the table with his disciples, when he says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. That's the heart of the gospel. Love. A love so expansive that it crosses boundaries, even of death. A love so courageous that it stands beside the vulnerable. A love so deep that it refuses to let suffering have the final word. A love so determined that it loves even the people in this room, the ones sitting right next to you, not abstractly, but right here in this very room. To be Christ's hands and feet in the world means feeding hungry children, because every child bears the image of God, even those in Gaza and Sudan. It means standing beside immigrants and refugees, saying you belong here, not abstractly, but standing up for Kitsap resident Boone and other residents who have been detained. And we remember that Boone was detained after fleeing to our country as a refugee from Laos and has been living as our neighbor for 40 years. It means protecting the dignity of LGBTQIA+ people, mourning the life of Juniper Blessing, and fighting for our trans siblings' lives, because belovedness is not something that is earned. It means advocating for affordable housing, healthcare, justice, because loving our neighbor is not about thoughts and prayers. It is our hands, it is our feet, it is our voices. It means sitting at the table at the retreat with new people and sharing just a little bit more about who we are, with each testimony that we hear in the morning, with each story that we tell, and greeting one another with joy and inclusion each Sunday. This is what it means to continue the works of Jesus, not because we are perfect, not because we always get it right, but because Christ's Spirit dwells among us and within us. The incarnation did not end 2,000 years ago. Christ lives in us. Christ's love dwells in us. Christ's work continues through our hands, our feet, in our lives, in this church, in our midst. And so on this Sunday, when we remember the ascension of the risen Christ, we remember that Christ has no hands but ours, no feet but ours, no voice but ours, no acts of compassion but ours. The story of God's love is still being written, and we are invited to help write it. And the people say, Amen.